The unveiling of the company of heaven. Every man and every woman is a star.
Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to the Free Radical Media Podcast. I am one of your co-hosts, Eric Scott Picard, joined as ever by Patrick Ryan.
Hey, how's it going, everybody?
Today, we've got a fun show for you. We're going to be joined by Gabriel D. Roberts. Gabriel Roberts is a theological scholar, researcher, author, and public speaker that specializes in discussing about the nature of perception and belief. After 27 years of searching and study, Roberts stepped away from his long-held Christian faith into a more expansive and fluid worldview, the details of which are cataloged in his book, Born Again to Rebirth. Gabriel has written for Vice Magazine, Disinformation, and Reality Sandwich. And his latest book, The Quest for Gnosis, is available now with interviews from a laundry list of interesting people that we'll talk about in a few moments. Gabriel, welcome.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Oh, it's good to have you. It's good to have you. First of all, I suppose let's just jump right in with your background. Tell us a little bit about how you got into this field of study.
Okay. Well, it's funny because when you grow up, you only know the way that you grew up. So everyone kind of has their story. So what I grew up in, I thought was normal, but normal's really a subjective thing. So I grew up in an evangelical Christian home, fundamentalist in nature. We believe that the Bible was the true word of God, that it was pure and holy, direct from the source, and that it was essentially the story of how we ought to live our lives, and was our moral compass, was our tome for guidance, all of those things. And from a very young age, I was imbued with a passion for, living life to the fullest. And, when I was a kid, I was told that there was a certain set of rules that life was to be abided by, and those rules were dictated by my Pentecostal Christian view of the Bible. And so I did my best with what I had, and I went through. I did everything that you're supposed to do as far as the rule books are concerned. If you play a video game, you find out what things work in what situations. Or if you play football, you know that you're on a football field. You know that there's a ball. You know that there's other players, and they all have different positions and different roles that they play. But you don't play soccer on the football field, or baseball. You just play by the rules. And so that's kind of what I did in a nutshell. Is I lived life the way I thought life was supposed to be lived, and that worked for me for quite a while, because there's a lot of really wonderful circular reasoning that you can find in Christianity that kind of eliminates all of all the loose ends. It's kind of like that circular reasoning. The Bible is true and is holy and pure because the Bible says so.
Huh.
Yeah.
The Bible is the final authority on truth because the Bible says that it's the final authority. It's like self-fulfilling. So there's a lot of that goes on. So I grew up in that Christian tradition, and I wanted to be a missionary doctor. I wanted to be a minister. I wanted to, I believed that anyone who wasn't a Christian was going to burn in hell for all of eternity because of their distanced relations with the one true God. And so I was really concerned about that. And I lived my life in a way that tried I tried to convince other people to become Christians so that they wouldn't burn in hell. Just like if a house was on fire and someone didn't want to leave the house, you would try to convince them to leave the house because the house was on fire. It was very cut and dry and simple for me in that regard. And it wasn't until much later on that a lot of life happened, and I realized that this wasn't working, and that this wasn't the only way that you could see the world. And so that's where kind of a lot of fractures came in, and made it very difficult for me, once having established a life where, I was a missionary, I was in a Christian rock band, I was, a minister, I had I got married at the age of 21, had 2 kids by the age of 25. I mean, I did all of the very Christian-y things that you can do, and at one point I realized that none of it was working. So, and I wrote Born Again to Rebirth about that philosophical progression. I don't write the book like I'm talking about, the Bible is malarkey because science, or because, I have all of these great proofs from this or that. I went about it from the personal experience, because if you can say anything about a fundamentalist, it's that they go on their mystic experiences and their feelings. And when you base things on mystic experience and feelings, which are entirely, subjective, it's really hard to convince somebody otherwise, especially if anything paranormal happens, if anything remotely spiritual happens. Even if there are things that are doubtful, you're like, well, this proves it, because look at this person, they're obviously possessed. Or, you know what I mean?
Yeah, sure.
There are these things that you use as proofs, and so the quote-unquote facts that we learn from science and things like that really don't matter at all, because the ultimate truth is transcendent. It goes beyond the physical realm. So there's a lot at play there, of course. So when I did Born Again to Rebirth, I wanted to write talking about how I felt moment to moment, how it felt to be a child and be a missionary, how it felt to go through certain experiences, and what it felt like to be concerned about your faith, about losing your faith, about thinking, wow, am I going to go to hell if I don't believe this anymore? And that's a really heavy trip. And
yeah. It's usually referred to as like, but in Christian terms, a dark night of the soul.
Yeah.
Right. That whole that transformation. The loss and regaining of faith.
Yeah. For sure.
Is that the kind of experience you're talking about then, that you experienced yourself, or?
Well, yeah, I think that there is kind of a pendular swing. There is this idea in which you look at, I kind of think about reality, or I think about religion in layers. We could take the act of sexual intercourse as a great example. If a 5-year-old asks you what sex is, they say, "What's sex?" You're going to describe it a little bit differently to a 5-year-old than you would to a 13-year-old boy or a 13-year-old girl, or the way you would describe it to your best friend at the age of 35, talking about sex. The terms you use, the ideas that you have, the layers of complexity that are there are very, very different. And mystical texts are very much this way. There's no doubt that the Bible is a beautiful manuscript that has been meticulously crafted. And, we got to hand it to the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD. They unified a text that for 300 years had been sort of swinging in the breeze, and we're just picking up random texts and calling that Christianity and things like that. And actually, I think that was a political event. That would be like the president saying, all of these religions are a problem, so we're going to bring all the religious leaders together and just settle this once and for all. It just makes sense for the government to do that. Like, just unify everything, make life easier. But all that to say that there are layers to it. They're just like anything else. And for most people who don't really give a shit, they, who grow up in it and they like America and they like football and they like drinking beer and eating at Sonic or whatever, they're fine with it. They're never going to change. They never want to. And that's just the way that things are for them. And, I've really come full circle. You talk about the dark night of the soul and kind of that return to spirituality. And that totally happened for me. And I also describe that a bit in Born Again to Rebirth, in which I step away and then I kind of rediscover a greater depth of spirituality that goes beyond what terms the Bible dictates as to the nature of God and the nature of reality, the nature of eternity and the soul, all of those things. And so in that sense, I've become the path that I started on as a child. I have not stepped away from. I have grown in that, and I've been in that continuous process ever since. If you were to ask friends and relatives who are still evangelical Christians, who know my work, know my history, especially my transitional phases, they would probably disagree. They would probably not say that I'm a very spiritual person. They would probably say that, I'm a degenerate, or that I'm cocky, or that I think I know everything, or something like that, because I don't believe that the Bible is the inspired word of God. And I have good reasons for that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Why don't you go into some of those reasons then? I mean,
Okay. Well, aside from going through the basics, let's talk about the idea of knowledge, right? We have these brains, and we pride being smart. We think being clever is a great thing. And yet, almost at every turn in the big stories of the Old Testament, the original stories, great example, the serpent, Eve, the tree of knowledge.
Okay, yeah.
You don't want to have knowledge, because then what the serpent said was true. God didn't want them to have knowledge, because then they would know good from evil. Right. So essentially, before this time, they were automatons. They were robots. And somehow that was okay. And everything in the Bible goes under this kind of idea that, well, it's okay for there to be a double standard because it's God. God can make double standards. It's like if you play Monopoly with somebody who randomly changes the rules, or can decide to take money from all of you at any given time. You're like, this isn't even, there's no rules. This is totally unfair. And then
at that point, it just becomes an exercise in futility. Yeah.
Right. Like in the book of Job, here's another. Okay, so there's the issue of knowledge. When a Christian talks about being very clever and knowledgeable, they are actually demonstrating the antithesis of what Jehovah demonstrates he doesn't want. Doesn't want you to think, just obey. Don't think, just obey. You can hear, modern, what is her name? Joyce Myers. She's quoted saying, logic and reason are tools of the devil. Just stuff like that, where you're like, you're not supposed to think. And really, it's there. What happens in the Tower of Babel? The story of the Tower of Babel is that all of humanity gets flooded. All these people die. But, however many people, let's take it at face value. Let's say that the Great Flood happened. The entire world was flooded because people were making out too much or whatever, right? So all of the animals and all of the people are drowned to death, including the innocent infants and all of those things. No big deal. That's totally moral activity, because God
did it.
Yeah, God owns the monopoly board. So then you have this situation where everybody's like, we really didn't like that happened, and we don't want it to happen to us again. So let's build a building that's tall enough that it can't be flooded, and let's make it with tar and make it waterproof, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they start to build this, and then God, of course, in this voice, talks in a myriad, meaning, you know, many voices.
Yeah.
Well, if we allow them to do this, then there's nothing that they won't that they can't do, right? So all of humanity was united. Well, and what does God do? God says, nah, I don't want humanity to be united in a common purpose because they would accomplish everything that they want to accomplish. What? Isn't that what we're trying to do now? Like, we're trying
right.
to stop killing each other. We're trying to start to understand each other, speak a common language, all of these things. And that's exactly what God does in the Old Testament. God just says, I'm going to confuse all of your languages and scatter you all over and make some of you Asian, some of you black, and some of you Caucasian, some of you, Indians, and all of that. That's what I'm going to do. So it's just really weird. So the very foundation of Christian ideas is that your brain, don't use your brain. You're not supposed to use your brain. You're just supposed to obey and focus on warm, fuzzy feelings. Generate warm, fuzzy feelings by getting together and singing and worshiping and doing all this stuff. So, okay, that's one take. I could go a million different directions with this, but I'm going to try and keep it focused. Then if you take Gnostic cosmology, remember we were talking about 325 AD. Let's say the crucifixion actually occurred around 2530 AD. Okay, for the sake of argument, now you have about 300 years where it's the Wild West, where there's people running around with texts that they say are the original stories about Jesus, about this Christ character. Well, half of those are Gnostic texts. The Gnostics were just as dominant as what we know to be and what has turned out to be the Catholic Church and eventually going into Protestantism. None of that was cemented until 325 AD under the Emperor Constantine.
Mm-hmm.
So for 300 years, it was the Wild West. So imagine the three of us get together and America is completely destroyed, and we are the ones who gather up the papers and talk about who George Washington truly was. Okay. And we are the definitive people on who, but we don't have any technology. We just have whatever papers are sitting around. So this is what we're doing. We're rebuilding this sort of history. And of course there was a lineage and there was things being passed down. But the idea is that you have this, this is supposed to be a life and death, like eternal life, eternal death. Like your soul will burn for all of eternity, endlessly, nonstop. Like you will just burn forever. That's wow. And if you get it wrong. But we decided that this is okay, this will work, it'll be totally fine. So up to that point, the Gnostics were contemporaries. And after 325 AD, there was a systematic, basically, slaughter of anyone who wasn't Christian like that. And the Gnostics died at the spear. That's why the Nag Hammadi library, that's why all of these Gnostic texts were buried, because these people were being hunted down. And so long story short, the Gnostics say that the God of the Old Testament, the one who doesn't want you to think, who disperses you when you're trying to have unity among people, that God is actually not the real God. That God is a kind of, is like the demiurge is the name for it, but is kind of like a gigantic psychic vampire. Basically, all of material beings are intended for the sole purpose of feeding him and his glory. So basically imagine you were a psychic vampire. You were feeding off a person's fear or their worship, one or the other. Yeah. So either way you win, because you're feeding off of this energy, right? And this is the idea that the Gnostics had. And so what they did was they tried to live ascetic lives. They ate minimal foods. They abstained from intercourse. All of these things they did in an ascetic life. And of course, there were variations to this. But they basically looked back and they saw this long trend in the Old Testament of a really messed up vampiric being imposing itself, pretending to be the true creator of all being, the author of all life. Where in reality, they talk about the story of these greater gods, and Gnosticism looks a lot more like Hinduism, in which basically in Hinduism there is one God that is unknowable, unseeable, unfathomable to the human mind. But
Brahma,
there are emanations of that God and emanations of those emanations and so on and so forth. And one of those emanations from that great source was Sophia, which is the Greek word for knowledge. And she, instead of collaborating with other gods to make this new material god, she makes it kind of in hiding and creates this deaf and blind god who thinks he's the only one. So the demiurge is created and basically thinks he's the other one. And he says jealous, mean stuff like, I'm the only god there is. You can't have any other gods around here. Like this whole idea, right?
Yeah.
All of this to say that this is the counterpart to a lot of these Old Testament ideas. I'm not necessarily saying that that's what I believe in a mystical sense. I'm saying that if you have two ideas of Christianity and you look at basic morality, like if your next door neighbor drowned all of his children because they misbehaved, you might not want to be their neighbor. You might want to report them, right?
Right, sure.
but again, if it's God, you're like, oh, well, that's God. He can drown all his children if he wants. I mean, he made them. Yeah, it makes total sense. So then you have this attitude, right? The devil is the enemy of God, right? In basic Christian ideas, right? So then you have the book of Job, which is the oldest book of the Bible, age-wise.
Yeah.
And the story is of Satan sauntering into the throne room, because God, even though God is immaterial and is omnipresent, has a room that he sits on. He sits on a throne somewhere, and
right.
And Satan comes sauntering in. He's like, yeah, this guy. They're just talking. And then God says, have you considered my servant Job? He really loves me. He's so great. And he says, I bet I could test his faith and he would still love me. Right?
Yeah.
And they go into this whole thing about, they basically put a wager and they're like, yeah, I'm going to torture this guy. I'm going to kill everyone he loves. I'm going to take away all that he has, and I'm going to give him boils and bring him inches from death. And he's still not going to curse my name. And then when all of this is done, and he's asking me, like, why did you do this? I'm going to yell at him.
Yeah.
I'm going to say,
right.
You know what? You are a piece of garbage, and you deserve nothing. I've made beasts that are better than you, and so live with it, sucker. Right? This is the attitude that is portrayed, right? Imagine the next door neighbor who drowned all of his children now has a wager with his friend how much he could torture his dog. And he says, I'm going to torture this dog for 10 days straight. And I bet you after 10 days, he still comes to sit in my lap. Right?
Mm-hmm.
This is, and to the Gnostics, this was the most ghastly, offensive evil that you could possibly imagine. And frankly, when you look at it in that perspective, the next door neighbor perspective, the removing the veil of God, just saying, what if a person did this? It's the most insidious, horrific thing you've ever heard of.
Absolutely, yeah, it certainly is. The Book of Job is terrifying.
Yeah.
And the the Genesis story. I think there's a lot of allegories can be made. From the Genesis story, absolutely. But it does portray a God that is, this essentially cruel. I guess my question, why do you think why do you think the Hebrews, the people who were writing the Old Testament, the people who actually wrote the thing, right? But what do you think was their motivation for portraying their God in that way?
Well, I think that there's a lot of you know anthropology involved in that, but I guess what I would say is that, well, what in theology school, what they said was, well, it was a different time back then. Things were pretty violent. So this is the way that they just related to each other. This is how life was, right? But
Hmm.
we talk about layers, and uh, I think that ultimately the issue at hand is that not everyone has the time or energy or interest in the nature of being, the meaning of life. Some people just want to eat, drink, and be merry.
Hmm.
And they just want to survive and enjoy a little bit of life while they're here. Other people are very concerned about what happens after you die, because death is really scary. And in the West, in the modern world, death is very sanitized. We don't see the skulls of our loved ones. We don't see their severed heads or their charred remains. Everything is sanitized, tidy, clean. We put makeup on our corpses, all of that stuff, right? We don't see, I mean, these people had to watch as their families, were rotten by plague, were eaten by worms, were devoured by wild beasts. I mean, this was not a pleasant place to be. Marauding people come in and slaughter everyone. There's limbs everywhere. I mean, this is a ghastly life, and it was. I mean, that's the nature of human history, right? And so when you're talking in those terms, you have to speak the language. And so on the base level, the stories will have a violent reflection, and that kind of that patriarchal, powerful kind of dick swinging sort of way of doing things. Coming in
Hmm.
and slaughtering all the bad guys, and the holy righteousness. Because when you have a unified us versus them mentality, you can come in and just slaughter everyone. And you see that dictated throughout the Old Testament as well. This idea of wholesale slaughter, of genocide, coming down from God, saying, slaughter the women, the children, slash open the bellies of the pregnant women, and smash the heads of the babies on the rocks.
Hmm.
Like, pretty straight up extreme. And yet it's very hard for us to look at history in that regard and see that for that time and place they also imbued a lot of wisdom. They wrote a lot between the lines, and there is, if anyone studies Kabbalah or studies magic, they
Hmm.
know that so many of our traditions, so much of what still goes on, was discovered with Egyptian magic, and a lot of those variations come from Egypt and Egyptian magic and things like that. They were all adopted by earlier civilizations, and they were just changed into this monotheism after, who was it? Akhenaten, I believe.
Hmm.
Uh, and so after that, it became a monotheistic way of doing things, and so really, there's a lot more to the Bible than your modern Christian might discover. In fact, I have a friend who's a great occult scholar who talks about how if you want to find the most powerful grimoires, most powerful, most like deep magical grimoires, go to
Hmm.
Walmart in the like Christian section, and you'll find the craziest faith healer stuff and all of these things. And what about
Yeah.
is the exact same stuff as what you'll see in medieval magic grimoires. It's the same stuff. And if you look, you see that in the Middle Ages, the blackest of black magic was developed by Catholic priests.
Yeah.
Like, this is history, and so and this is an interesting kind of movement into the quest for gnosis, because I explore some of those things with that. But just to say that I don't reject the Bible wholesale. I reject the idea that it is, one, a moral text. I reject that it is a holy text. But I do accept it as a historical text that has many, many layers of esoteric knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And you kind of have to take the good with the bad because of the nature of history, of human history.
Right.
That's kind of the attitude that I take towards it.
I totally agree with that, honestly. I mean, that's essentially my way of thinking about it as well. You know, what I just find interesting is that when you talk about religion, at some point you have to get down into the spirituality, right, that underlies, the religious doctrine, and that's pretty universal all over the world. That the spiritual center, like the longing for faith.
Yes.
Is a pretty universal concept.
And that's exactly what I cover in the Quest for Gnosis, because when I was done writing Born Again to Rebirth, I was like, yes, I have, to my satisfaction, described why modern American Christianity is bullshit, why it is not true, and why it actually takes people away from the true essence of spirituality, the true essence of what it is that may be called God. And I transition to say there's something to this, though, right? Like what you're saying. There is something to it. We are spiritual beings. We cannot escape this existential hunger for the other, for the holy other. And there are a lot of different takes that you can take on that. And so what I did in the Quest for Gnosis is I asked other people that I considered were experts. And I talked to them about it, because I don't have all the answers. I still don't.
Right.
This journey of enlightenment is a process. It's not just at some point you sit on the high mountain and say, finally I've achieved enlightenment. Now I can go have an ice cream. It's an ongoing process. So in the Quest for Gnosis, I say there is an ecstatic state that humans are experiencing, and they're using tons and tons of different ways of achieving this state. And so I talk to people about different ways of doing it. I talk to people who are atheists, and I discuss those matters. And it turns out that yes, whether you're a Muslim, a Hindu, a Buddhist, a Pentecostal Christian, or an atheist, you are experiencing ecstatic states. You are feeling spirituality, that deep sense, and it's real. But what happens is every religion appropriates that feeling and says, no, only when it's under this name is it okay. Anytime it's under these other names, it's of the devil, or whoever the antagonist is, whoever the bad guy is, it's of that guy. But that's just not true. And then we use the faults that religions have against them, and kind of create linguistic arguments, kind of fallacious discussions, where making straw men, a kind of a balloon character of what the essence of what is trying to be, and then attacking the balloon character. It doesn't really get anywhere. It only means you're really good at rhetoric.
You call it, I think you call it the mystic mafia in your book.
Yeah.
I got a laugh out of that.
So it's kind of that idea where it's, it comes down to this idea of just, you got to keep people on your team, basically, because you got to keep your power in your numbers. And so the problem is that we're all humans, and we all get stuck, and we all feel guilty for something, about something. We were told to stop masturbating when we were kids, or we were told, whatever it was that happened. We were beat as children. We were neglected. We were this, we were that. Everybody's got something that's gone wrong, and we kind of have that original hurt somewhere in us, and it fuels our inadequacy. And then on top of that, we have religions telling us that if we don't subscribe to their brand, we're going to continue to suffer for all of eternity. That's a heavy trip, man. It's really cruel. And I think that anyone who reaches a level of understanding where they see that that's a problem and they ignore it, that's when they turn evil. I don't care if you're a pastor. I don't care if you're a mullah. I don't care what you do. The moment that you know that you're peddling bullshit and you keep doing it, that's when you've become evil. That's when you become part of the problem.
Yeah.
And so that it's very difficult, because when I talk to people, if I talk to atheists and I say, atheism is really extreme, man. It's kind of fundamentalist in a lot of ways.
I agree with that. Yeah.
People get mad, and then they say, "Oh, well, you're a religious now." I'm like, "No, dude, I left religion. I don't do that." But I think the fundamentalism at any end of the spectrum is a really bad idea. We don't know. Our best scientists say we don't know. Our best philosophers say we don't know. I mean, I'm in grad school at University of Washington, and I'm in the humanities in kind of a mixed discipline approach. They call it interdisciplinary. And so I'm learning about anthropology, I'm learning about feminist studies, I'm learning about all kinds of things like that, continuing on with theological and philosophical discussions. And in that, lo and behold, we get to this place where realities, we all have individual realities built up. And again, it comes back to the occult and writers like Robert Anton Wilson, who describes our reality tunnels. Each of us has a way that we build our reality. In many ways, we can compare those, and many times we agree with other people about the nature of reality. But person to person, we have our own little individual worlds going on. Take, for instance, any relationship that we have. Let's say, for the sake of argument, I have a wife or a girlfriend, right? And the way that I see that person is not the way that they see themselves.
Mm-hmm.
The things that I think that they think are not the things they're actually thinking. They're thinking all kinds of other things, but I've built an image of them, which is the closest approximation to the core of their being that I can make. But it's not actually them. It is a construct. I've made an image of them that is not the true version of them. And what we try to do is we try to let other people see an image of us that is the truest form of us, or our idealized form of us, hiding our idiosyncrasies, our evil, our tics, our weirdness, whatever it is. And so we're all playing this game. At the same time, we're trying to find our self-worth. At the same time, we're trying to understand the nature of reality. At the same time, we're trying to make it to work on time, to not drink ourselves to death, to not whatever it is that's our tic. We're trying to deal with all of these things, and then we just get the head trip put on top of us, and systems of control and all of these other things that go on, where religion turns into government and patriotism and all these other ideologies kind of sandwiched together into this gigantic muck of control and nastiness, and we're still here trying to understand how to love ourselves and love each other. And we know that there's a good thing going on, but we're trying to get there, and it's really hard to cut through all of that. And that's the biggest challenge in my studies, is I have commissioned myself with the impossible task of finding some way to bridge all of those gaps, to cut through all of those things. And I think that in the quest for gnosis, I've touched on one single thread of a much larger tapestry. That one little thread is that we all have ecstatic states. We all find a way to have contact with what we consider the divine. And how we define it, how we describe it, those are all really subjective things that we will have a lot of difficulty in marrying perfectly one person to the next with 7 billion people on this planet.
Mm-hmm.
So then it comes back to, all right, that's way too complicated. What do? We reduce it. We reduce it down to love, not being shitty to people. Spending time being mindful, focusing on compassion, focusing on understanding the fact that we can never fully understand other people, and that we are always going to have to deal with the shortcomings of ourselves and others, and that interchange of compassion is the best way that we can live our lives. So I don't know if that makes sense, but that's what I've been working.
Totally. You were talking earlier, you were saying like layers with these religions. Mm-hmm. Do you think that we're at a time where these Gnostic ecstatic states is applicable for the general populace, or do you think it should still be sort of reserved for like a mystic class?
That's a challenge because, Jesus said, "Don't throw your pearls before swine." Here's the problem. A mature person and an immature person may sound very similar. One person may be, "Oh, I'm really stupid," right? So we'll just say, use the common vernacular, a basic person, your regular average person says, "Oh, I'm really stupid," or sometimes they get angry, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so they talk about they're angry, but they say it in a very standardized, basic way. A very mature person, after years of reflection, after years of working, may say the exact same thing, and you may take them as a dummy. And this is the problem: is that what needs to happen is you just need to provide the possibility. It's not our responsibility to, it's like leading a horse to water, right?
Mm-hmm.
All I'm doing, I feel like I have my own sense of purpose. And my own sense of purpose is to see the wonder of life and to translate it and distill it into basic terms so that more people can see the world the way I see it in all of its beauty and splendor. And try to dispense that and get people away from the things that are distracting them, keeping them enslaved, keeping them stuck in an unhappiness they can't quite define. You know what I mean? And having struggled under that unhappiness that I couldn't define for a long time and kind of unlocking that, it makes me want to help other people. And that's always been the core of what I wanted to do. So that's what I've been striving for. And I think that really, there's this film called The Holy Mountain, came out in the 70s by Alejandro Jodorowsky, really
Yeah.
fantastic.
Excellent film. Yeah.
And he says, the fish thinks of his hunger, not of the fisherman. It is the master that seeks the pupil, right? It's this idea that, we always have to be on the lookout for a teacher, but at the same time, I mean, there's so many complex things going on. Everyone's out to fuck you. Everyone, in some way, shape, or form, is looking to take advantage of you, or at least it feels that way. And we have to be on the lookout because the people that seem to be the safest are often the most dangerous. Hero after hero that we've grown up with, we find that they were terrible people in one way or another. Yeah. And people that we thought were terrible were actually all right. And all of these things go on. So that master class of people, there is no master. That is that's a construct. There is no man sitting on a high mountain somewhere that is venerable, that we must bow before or sit at the feet of. If we sit at the feet of a teacher, it's because we want to learn from them, and the teacher will be humble in their dispensation of that. And there is a time when you don't want to disrespect someone who's gone through the hard work. You know what I mean? Like being in grad school right now and seeing the workload, seeing how much you have to read and write and all of these things, and quickly assimilating knowledge, it's really easy for me to say before that, look at people with a doctorate and be like, "Oh, well, that doesn't mean you know everything." Well, yeah, but try doing the work, and then we'll see. Then we'll have a talk, because then you'll understand what it really means. And this kind of actually bridges the gap between one of the other big things that I discuss, which is important, and I think it bridges between that sort of catalyzing nature of this gnosis that we're discussing, and that's the psychedelic experience, right?
Yeah.
With psychedelics, I heard someone once describe it. I wish I could attribute it to who I heard it from, but I don't remember. I think it was a Buddhist. And they said that psychedelics are like taking a helicopter to the top of a mountain. The top of the mountain is where you want to go, right? You want to get that vista. That is the accomplishment. That is the goal. But then the helicopter takes you back down to the foot of the mountain.
Yeah.
Meditation and disciplined practice is climbing the mountain. Two very different things.
Yeah.
One you earn and one you get a vista of. No, I think both have value. But anyone who's done psychedelics under serious circumstances, meaning they weren't just there to party or whatever, anyone who's done them in this kind of spirit of exploration of life, spirituality, what reality is, all of these things, anyone who's done that with seriousness will say, yeah, I'm very cautious how often or how I take my psychedelics, because I value it, and it's not the reality that I'm put in. It's a vista. It's just a reminder that this isn't the only way reality can be done. And in that sense, it's really great when you need to have a reset and you get too caught up in all of the things that don't actually matter. And but psychedelics in general, for the general populace, we can look in our culture and see that psychedelics have been one of the greatest catalysts for change in waking people up. That feeling of interconnectedness. And I can say this personally, that there was one point, I left Christianity. I was like, well, I guess I'm going to be a materialist and not worry about spirituality. I'm going to go be a big fancy pants money making business guy in New York City. And I did it. I was a private jet broker for a while, and I was working with all of these guys who used to be stockbrokers. And anytime like someone would want to cancel a contract, they're like, "Fuck them. We'll just charge them $25,000," and they signed a contract, so there it is.
Yeah.
And they don't care at all.
Right.
And I thought, these people are animals, and it made me sick. And after a really strong psychedelic trip, I broke down. I had a new come to Jesus moment. I had a new revelation. But this time, the thing that I was hungering for the whole time, because you were told that if you are good enough, if you try hard enough, if you're devout enough, you will get a touch from God. You will see God. It's in worship music in Pentecostal Christianity. It's in all worship music in Christianity that this idea of, I want to see you, I want to touch you, I want to feel you. And these are all real, genuine desires that ought to be fulfilled. But they are rarely fulfilled within the milquetoast context of a third-rate copy of a copy of the original experience. I could take psychedelics and you could read about it, because I've written about my experiences, but it's not the same as you having the experience. And so in many ways, reading religious texts is like reading someone else's psychedelic trip report. And I think that the psychedelic in our culture, in our society, and why I am such an advocate of that in thoughtful circumstances, is that you're not going to see God per se, but you're going to see the other side. You're going to see some things, and maybe some of them you won't want to see, but you're going to see that there is another side, that there's something real. But there is that intrinsic feeling, that sense of interconnectedness, that I am connected to every plant, animal, person, the air, the stars, the sky, the water, the earth. I'm connected to all of these things. I'm a living part of this strange amalgamation of creatures, and I am both insignificant and also everything. And in that sense, that's your connection to the divine, in my opinion. And that is that's where it begins. And once you realize that, you're like, I need to stop being a selfish person. I need to stop acting like the world is my toilet.
Right, exactly. Yeah. It's that's truly the key, I think. And it's like the title of your book, the quest for gnosis. I mean, it's about the experience. I mean, you're right. You just reading about it isn't going to get you there. You have to do the work.
Yeah, and I think that is the thing. Once you have the psychedelic experience, it catalyzes change. Maybe it doesn't for some people, but everyone's responsible for themselves. I live and die by my own decisions. I could make a bad decision and die. I could do something terrible. That's my choice. That's my life. However, it seems very interesting to me that no matter where you go in the world, there is a psychedelic available. that occurs naturally, and that they've been used since long before written history, as far as we can tell from archaeological findings, from cave paintings and things like that. We can see hypnagogic patterns on 40,000-year-old cave paintings, in France and Germany. We can see all of that. Graham Hancock has cataloged a lot of that in his book Supernatural. Mm-hmm. So we have this experience, and I believe it's a birthright, and I think it's been much maligned, but there is hope. There is a new generation of psychonauts who aren't accepting the McDonald's culture, who aren't accepting the American dream. There is no American dream anymore.
Exactly.
There's something else, and we're figuring it out. And so I want to be one of those people that's bridging those gaps and trying to help people come to a faster recovery. I'm 37 years old. I started out on this kind of quest, so to speak, 10 years ago at 27. What if I started this quest not necessarily taking psychedelics before I was of adulthood, but what if I would have started all of my reading and studying in this regard when I was 18? How far ahead would I be? How much time did I lose? And I, of course, am thankful for the time that I have, but I want to make it easier for the next people, right? Because this is what we do with science. Stephen Hawking wrote the book Standing on the Shoulders of Giants. He talks about how these great discoveries, we don't have to go through all the struggle that Copernicus had to go through. Yeah. Because he figured that stuff out, and Newton and so on and so on. And so I can help future generations by what I'm studying and what I'm doing and living passionately for that. And I think that the spiritual life, really ultimately is up to the individual. If you want it, then do it, because no one else is going to do it for you. If you're unhappy with the way your life is, change it.
Right.
Greatness is in the doing. And what more can you say to that? Either you do what you need to do to change, to learn, to stretch yourself, and I would rather die doing something terrifying, trying to come that much closer to the magnificence of the divine, than to live in absolute terror and fear, being told what to do, what to think. No matter where I am, no matter what happens, I will always be free, because I choose to be free in that sense, and not to be confined by these artifices that held me for so long and kept me in fear and caused me to be not good to people. And who wants that? People are miserable. Yeah. We don't want this anymore.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think more and more people are, the world's slowly waking up to those realizations. We talk a lot about finding fundamentally new ways of doing things, whether that be, in terms of exchange or economics, or if that's politics, or if that's, as we're talking about now, spirituality. And I think finding these new isn't really the word, these ancient, ways of looking at spirituality rather than religious dogma is key to the next century, to the world we're trying to build.
Yeah.
It's got to be a fundamental part of the paradigm shift, and I think that's why so many people are attracted to it now. People are realizing that the old ways, are not making us happy, and they're looking for something that will.
Yeah, exactly. And we have to get over that idea that one of the great coups of authoritarian control was this Lutheran idea that was brought out by this guy by the name of Weber. He was kind of a contemporary of Marx, and he talked about work ethic. Like if you don't work, you're just lazy and you don't deserve anything. This idea of guilt, like almost like you're suffering, the valorization of suffering. Like there is valor in your suffering. Like I hope everyone knows how much I suffer for this. You know what I mean? Like right. Mom's slaving away in the kitchen. These ideas of suffering kind of for the glory of it. That sort of idea is imbued in us, and it's put into our culture, and it tells us that we have to suffer, that we actually shouldn't be happy, that we shouldn't actually seek happiness. I mean, that we have that in our terminology, but we don't actually want you to do that. We don't want you to actually be happy. Be miserable where you are, because we need a good cog in this machine. You know what I mean?
And you dare not criticize it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it's an ongoing process, but yeah, the only thing that we can do as thinkers and leaders and people who are trying to get the word out is to continue to make it easier to understand, to try to make to try and embody it in our lives, to not be hypocrites. It's really hard. We're humans. We're failures, but we got to do the best we can.
Yeah. I mean, that's absolutely true. That's absolutely true. Within your book, you talk to just a laundry list of intelligent people here. I mean, just Rupert Sheldrake, Graham Hancock, Peter Carroll, Rick Strassman. I mean, it's a pretty impressive list of thinkers.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah. I mean, I'd love to have conversations with a lot of these people in the book. I mean, that's to put all that in one place, to have this conversation with all these people. I mean, it's pretty impressive.
I think that model for a book is really great, because it takes away from this idea of the glory of the individual. Like, let's make no mistake about it. I want to sell books enough to make a living, but
sure.
And I have to, in certain degree, I have to develop a cult of personality. But I'm not here to make everything about the glory of Gabe.
Yeah.
I think that what's really important is this model where we're having a discourse. This is the way that it used to be in ancient Greece. The philosophers would get together and have long discourses and discuss things, and they were okay with disagreeing at times, and there were heavy arguments and things like that. But we've lost that art of discourse, and now we've gotten into the kind of Fox News style shouting match.
Right. Yeah.
If you put any two random people from the Quest for Gnosis in a room together, they might not agree on 50% of what's going on. But that wasn't my intention. My intention was to show the common thread. And so when you have Peter J. Carroll, who's the founder of Chaos Magic, which is kind of a hybridization of old shamanic and magical methods and things like that, bringing it into kind of the ideas that Robert Anton Wilson had with basically thinking about your mind like it is a computer, and that you can change the operating system of that computer. And so you have people like that. But Peter J. Carroll, although he believes in Rupert Sheldrake's morphic resonance, he believes that is a genuine thing. He doesn't believe that there's a God. Yeah. Okay. But he still believes in spiritual stuff going on. He still believes that there's a karmic law. He still, you know what I mean? There's all these things going on. And then you have Hamilton Morris from Vice magazine, and he's an atheist, but he's also an advocate for psychedelics, and he talks about the experience and not taking it on authority of other people. So then you have this thread between them, these little places where people connect. And so with all of these ideas, you have a discourse in which you can see the common threads, and some people, if you don't like them, you can move on. And, I put in my own thoughts, of course. But this model, I think, is really great. And in fact, in April, a new book is coming out with Graham Hancock called The Divine Spark. And it's about consciousness and about psychedelics. And it's got Rick Strassman. It's got all kinds of people. Dennis McKenna.
Thad McCracken,
David J. Brown. Russell Brand, and I'm in there as well. So you have the same idea, basically, of having some conversations. And it's really good because what that does is, I mean, the core of why I did the Quest for Gnosis was those people on that list were the ones who changed my life.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
and I don't tell people who's right or who's wrong. I just say these guys are good. And if you like what they say, they have a lot more to say. And so I give people a lot of rabbit trails to go down. And that's kind of the idea behind it, is to allow people to take control of their own destiny and take whatever direction feels right to them, but give them something to work with. And so that's why the Quest for Gnosis is great. And I do want to mention that although my books are sold in paperback, you can buy them online on Amazon.com and all of that stuff, and also at GabrielDRoberts.com. They're also free downloads. I want to make sure that people understand that they don't have to pay any money to read The Quest for Gnosis or to read Born Again to Rebirth. I've decided that I want these to be free forever as a PDF download. So people can still buy the paperback, and it really doesn't change my sales all that much. But this is my way of proving, I guess, that I'm not just in it for making a buck. So if anyone's out there and they're listening to this and they can't afford to to buy a book, you can download the PDF to your computer or to your mobile device. You can go to GabrielDRoberts.com/bookstore, and there's easy instructions for downloading either Born Again to Rebirth or The Quest for Gnosis. So I just want people to know that they don't have to pay anything. I'm going to be okay. It all works out in the end,
No, yeah, absolutely. And I see more and more creative people going with that model. Amanda Palmer, who's a musician, has expressed essentially the same thing. Like she said, the question isn't how do we make people pay for music, it's how do we let people pay for music. So she puts all her stuff up online for free, and it's, she goes through with Kickstarter and donations and things like that, which is kind of what you're doing with the book. It's an interesting model. It's one I like and I appreciate, But it looks like we're just about at our hour here. I don't know, is there anything else? I know you've also got a novel coming up. You're going to be releasing this year?
Yeah, just a quick mention of that. The book is called The Hermit, and it is essentially a fictionalized tale of what's gone on in the last few years of my life. And whatever you see in The Quest for Gnosis, this is kind of lived out in this storyline. And I wrote it as a novel rather than a biography, because I wanted to speak about things the way that I saw them and felt them, rather than the way that you would describe them to a police officer if the event occurred. You know what I'm saying? I wanted to be able to talk about transition between the mundane states of being directly into a psychedelic or mystical state of being, without having to qualify it and explain the whys and hows, and just to say things as they were, and to also protect people, because there's lovers in there, there's people who do criminal activity, but this is all in a part of the story. But The Hermit is the tale of finding enlightenment in the gutter, essentially. And so it'll probably be out early in the fall, but I'm really excited about it. It's my first novel, and it's going to be really groundbreaking, I think.
Well, we'll certainly be looking forward to that. It does sound interesting.
Yeah.
Gabriel, it's been really great. It's been a good conversation.
Super fascinating.
Yeah,
good.
Absolutely.
You can have me back anytime you like. Just let me know when you want to do it.
Sounds great. Gabriel D. Roberts, Born Again to Rebirth, The Quest for Gnosis. You can find him, GabrielDRoberts.com, which will be in the link, the description of this podcast. Free Radical Media Podcast. Eric Scott Picard, Patrick Ryan.